Welcome to Well Played Podcast, a show on all things playful and joyous in education. I'm your host, Michael Matera, sixth grade teacher, author, and speaker. Well Played is a part of the On Podcast Media Network, so definitely go out there and check out some of the other podcasts there. Today is Season 4, Episode 29, and we are going to be talking about boss battles in the classroom with a returning guest here. Jeremy, is super excited to have you. If you could give us a brief introduction, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate that. And so I teach 8th grade math. I'm in the Central Valley of California, and doing the fully digital, fully online learning thing these days. Here in the midst of COVID, and it's going okay. It's going pretty good.
That's awesome. Just a reminder, everybody else, I'm doing both at the same time, in person and hybrid, and it's going. We'll say it's going. We'll say it's going.
Yes.
But thank you so much for coming back on. I absolutely love having returning guests. I think it really speaks, I think, to the community we have in things like XPLAP and, just Twitter in general and Teacher's Table and, Well Played community where like these people want to continue to give and share. And I appreciate your time as well as others. So thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about boss battles today. And before we get into it, I guess I want to somewhat approach it a wee bit from the beginner's mindset here. Of like, like if they don't know boss battles, they've just sort of gotten into this gamified thing. I guess give your hand at trying to explain what a boss battle would be.
I appreciate that approach, actually, because I guess this is probably my third year doing a full gamified game, and I didn't do boss battles until last year. And yeah, it just took me a while to get my brain around it, around how it could work in the flow of my classroom and stuff. But they can be used in a lot of ways, right? So, yeah. But basically, whether you want to use it as like a review or as an assessment, maybe a little bit of a combination of both. It's basically, asking content-related questions to your students, and that they are attacking a boss that has some amount of health that is taken with those right answers. And then, usually kind of the way I've seen it done and the way I do it, if wrong answers will result in the possibility or, the loss of health for the students, sort of a thing. So I don't.
No students were harmed in the filming of this episode of Well Played.
That's right. Just pretend health.
Just so we're all clear. No. So yeah, you got it, right? So a boss battle is kind of like a tricked out review game, if you will. And as always, I always really encourage us to like try our hand at creating our own a little bit, as opposed to using off the shelf product or spice up the off-the-shelf product. So you could use something like Kahoot or GimKit or Quizzes or something like that with your boss battle if you want. Like that could be a way you kind of factor it in. But yeah, like it's just this fun idea of we're answering some questions, and with each right answer, we're going to do some damage to the boss. Each wrong answer, the boss is going to strike back. And you can kind of think up as many iterations of bosses and their power-ups and the things they do to the kids as you want. I gotta say, my kids love boss battles, which is rather funny to me. Like, I'm excited that they love it, but if you think about it, like, it's like a quiz, really, right? Like, if truth be told, we're giving kids quizzes, and like in between each right question, they're rolling a dice or whatever to like defeat the boss. But there's something about the cooperation. There's something about like the risk in that moment. And it's, I don't know. There's a heightened situational awareness, which I dig.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying about kind of the scalability of it, right? That you can make it kind of really complicated or really simple. I think when I first started, kind of my method last year was I used Pear Deck, and I did multiple choice on Pear Deck, and then I was looking for like a certain number of answers that are correct to the question, and that would determine an attack or not. Which even that's kind of a step more complicated than could be,
Yeah.
But like I didn't have any dice, anything. I didn't have any like powers on the bosses. It was just straight like,
Can we get
okay,
this guy
I
to
have
0?
what's that?
Can we get this guy to 0? That was
Exactly right. So for me when I started out, it was like you got the question right. It takes away 1 health point or 1 whatever. I even did like they have these restickable glue sticks, so like they turn anything into a post-it. So I like printed out hearts and I put hearts on the whiteboard, and so then just whenever they got a question right, I take one of the hearts of the boss away. But I guess the point is, there's kind of it could be, like I said, really simple or more complicated.
No, I like that sort of reminder. I'll tell you guys that my first boss battles were pretty easy. I didn't use any tech for the questions. I don't know about you, but like after you've taught the same subject for a while, like I pretty much know my content. And so to be honest, sometimes the thought of like sitting down and making a Kahoot or a Gimkit, this sounds really lazy. And so I'm just going to hope not a lot of people are listening to this podcast. But I mean, like the thought of like typing in all the like multiple choice questions and the 4 answers, like, oh man, it's going to take like a whole prep period to make that. Yet I know my content. So like my first iteration of a boss battle was really just like, hey, I'm asking this table a question, and I'm just going to make it up on the top. I know my vocab terms. I know the people in this chapter. So boom, I'll just ask a question. And if they answer it right, we roll a die, knock the boss down. I use the whiteboard. I just had like, this guy's at 50 points. Oh, now he's at 44 points. Good roll. Nice job. Hey, next group. Here's the next question. Whatever comes up in my head. And one, I liked that for its ease. I mean, like, again, if you know your content, like that takes no time at all. I like the sort of collaboration for this because it was a bit of a like review. So kids working together to answer together, they would have a little time to like confer with each other. Usually I played in rounds, and like the first round, the whole table could talk with each other. The second round, I would call on somebody on a table, and then like that shut out the others. They couldn't like help them. But that's like really simple, right? Like my first iteration, the boss didn't do anything like you're saying. It was just, can we get it to 0 in time before the end of the class or before whatever time period I set? So pretty basic mechanics that anybody could try. So I'd really suggest you guys do that if you like just want to dabble for a little bit. And again, your kids have never experienced it. So I think sometimes when we aim super high, what happens is we never end up doing it either again because it was like, well, that was so complicated, or we never actually launch it because we keep thinking about how high we can take it. And I tell you, just that like base set of ingredients that I gave you, that's a wonderful like educational like stock that you can just like add other flavors to, layer on there if you want to get it bigger and more complicated. But that base stock that we just talked about, I think would work for anybody.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about like with that sort of a format where you're just kind of answering questions on the fly, like that's really adaptable too. Like I've been thinking like it'd be fun to throw some random events in here. We're kind of starting to get into the kind of the rhythm and the flow of the game, and so it might be fun to like have a random event here or there. And one of those possible random events could be like a little mini boss, that you could just throw out and like have like 3 to 5 questions or whatever. See if we can knock this guy out real quick. And just as like a random event, just to spice up the class, and could be one of your little formative checks or whatever.
Yeah. So like other ways we can spin these bosses, right? So I think the next thing I wanted to talk about, I'm going to pause for a sec, and we're going to slide what I wanted to talk about a little later, and we're going to go on this idea here of once you get them used to the structure of a boss battle, like the traditional format, I would say, would be like some sort of review or assessment at the end. but you could have these little drop-in challenges. And I know some people have done this where they print out little cards, and so they just make this little deck of mini bosses. And in any activity, so like let's say your kids in your math class are working on whatever they're working on, you could just drop down on a table or one kid's chair, like boom, you got to defeat this guy. But they're smaller, like you're saying, like they only have to get to like 12 points of damage, which might be like, I don't know, 3-4 questions they have to answer. And again, if you know your content, like you know you're working on, I don't even know what 8th grade math is these days, solving for X, we'll just say, boom, you can just like have them solve for X a few times, roll that die, and it could be a great way to sort of check with people. Easy way to differentiate too, because you know how complicated to make those problems for this kid versus that kid. I think that would be good. I think I might want to sit down and do some of these little mini bosses.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't thought through, this is just an idea, just thinking about in the last couple of days, but I haven't thought through how that would work digitally yet, but really, if you got the images, right, you could just share your screen real quick and be like, oh, here's the guy we're fighting. And that would work just as good as having a printed out card, I feel. So
what do you use for your digital classroom, your virtual?
We use the WebEx as our platform, so I can share my screen on that, and I run most of my class through Google Classroom. That was in
WebEx, like I know in Zoom, you can message everybody, or you could select an individual and message them privately. Can you do that on WebEx?
I can do individuals privately. I don't know if I can do groups privately, but I could do individuals privately.
So you could do that for like a mini boss. I mean, you could make one Google template for like these bosses, and you could just like say, hey, Michael, like boom, mini boss gone your way. I just texted you this. And maybe like while the rest of the class is working on something, Michael's got to work on that problem, and he's got like 60 seconds to do it or whatever.
Give me something to think about here. Because I was thinking, these little drop-in like random events for kind of whole class, but definitely you could like target kids too, not in like a bad way, but like in like is there a kid that's not being engaged, or is there a kid that you need to have practice in a particular area or whatever,
You could do it where you message. Oh, see, now you're getting me. Like, not the point of the podcast, but this is what I love right here. So this is showing people kind of one of the aspects I love about gamification is you just get on these ideas of like different ways you could structure things. And I think gamification really like frees up your thinking, because here we're talking about an experience that over time will be for everyone, but in the moment there'll be this kind of like excitement because it'll only be for 1, 2, or 3 students. Yeah, over the course of the year, if you started doing these mini bosses, it'll be for everybody. But the little spin on it I was going to tell you is maybe the Google slide has, let's say, like 3 slides on it. Slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. And you message the first kid. All right, boom, Mike's got to do slide 1. When Mike's done with problem slide 1, he has to then like message the next person. And then like they have to message the next person. And just say that like you have 6 minutes to do all the problems. And that like infuses both a little bit of the tech challenge. Like you better like be ready to get the chat, ready to like do your thing. Like, because really by the time you get in there, you might only have 60 seconds to do the problem or whatever. I mean, if it's a challenging problem,
that's a really good idea though. Because you could just do a slides presentation that like anybody can edit and just like private message that first kid, be like, okay, slide 1's yours, mini boss, you know, get on it. You get to pick the next person, and just like,
I dig that.
That's pretty cool. That'd be really good for your online kids too.
Yeah.
Because it's like there's already like, especially if you targeted those kids first, they probably have a tendency to feel a little bit more disconnected than your other kids who get to be live in the classroom,
Yeah.
And so if you targeted some of those kids first, it's a special thing just for them. There's probably not as much things that are just for them these days,
I dig it. See, look at, okay, that's a wrap, everybody. I got some work to do. But all right, so back to the boss battles. I was going to say, like, have you had mentioned that, you last year started doing boss battles for your first time. Have you added more complexity to the boss itself, right?
Ooh, like giving the boss like special powers. No. I've added more complexity in terms of like how points are taken away. So at first I started no dice because I was just trying to like make sure I got the right numbers so the boss was beatable, right, in the class period. And sometimes when he wasn't, that's okay because it's like, well, then you get to fight him again next week or whatever, But so like not having the dice in there was like, I'll just start basic, And so then I added dice, and then I also added items that the kids could play to attack the boss or add health to themselves or add attack against the boss. But I haven't given the boss particular powers. Apart from, I did a variation on a boss battle where it was a race. And instead of fighting a boss, they're racing a boss. And so again, with that little post-it glue stick, I just did, I think by then I was doing the space game then still. So I had like a TIE fighter and like a Millennium Falcon, right? And I had them stuck to the board. And so the boss would move like 1 or 2 spaces every time, regardless of the kid's answer. And the kids would move based on a die roll. And then I also made it so they had to gather fuel. So, and the fuel came from, actually no, they started with fuel, and the fuel just came from just during the week I would throw out poker chips to kids for their participation, not even telling them what they were for, but I just throw them poker chips. And then I like looked and totaled up at the end of the week and gave them a certain number of fuel cells at the start of the race. And so then like when they're running out of fuels, I'm like, oh, someone's got to give fuel. And if they and it was fun because the team with the most fuel at the end would get like a bonus, right? And so like they were like all looking and like gauging like, okay, who has fuel? We have to have fuel, but I don't want to give up my fuel. And that ended up being really fun. That was one that they really liked a lot. So, yeah.
I dig it. I have made, I don't even know, like the sum total. I think I have probably like 20 or 30 different bosses, and I've come up with a smattering of different like power-ups of those bosses. Some of them would work for everybody. Some are a little too like connected to my game and how it works. What I try to do is build, and I guess I'd recommend this to everybody. In my game, I have something called BP that stands for battle points. And what I did was every boss had a couple different statistics on it, one of which was called the BP line. And if your group, your guild, had a number higher than the BP line, you'd get like a good bonus. It means like you're well equipped for this boss. And so it might mean like a +1 on your die roll. It might mean you get to re-roll like 3 times in the battle, whatever. And you could kind of change those up. And then same thing, if you're below the BP line, then maybe like the boss gets +1 to the die roll, that kind of thing. But what I liked about it is one of the hardest things for me starting boss battles, and anybody that's began gamification lately will say the same thing about just points in general. They're like, what's the right scale to use? And then you get hung up on the scale. Like, I don't know how many points to give out. Like, I don't know how many points before they get to the next level, these kind of things. And for me, when I started my bosses, I got caught up in that same thing. And what I liked about this BP line is I didn't put a number on the BP line. The number would be printed on my just board. I'd write it in class. And so this way I could make 50 bosses right now. And then I just changed the BP line based on what time of the year it is. Like, oh, like right now, like a good group's got like 200 BP. So we'll set it at like 175 is the BP line. But like, oh, like week 1 of school, like the BP line was like 10, like, but I didn't have to like reprint out these cards or re-edit my templates or whatever, because you just say all I had to write on there were what the bonuses were for being above the BP line and what the negative was for being below the line. But I didn't define what the line was. And I liked that variability. And then some of the boss powers. I think one of my favorite ones was this like Pharaoh's undead army. And what it was just 4 guys that only had to take 1 hit. Like, that's it. But if you got 1 wrong, 2 more appeared.
Oh, that's cool.
So like,
it's like a little bit like the Hydra.
Like super easy, right? But like, or infinite. Yeah, like infinite coming at you. That was a fun one. I have one that he's like this ninja and he lurks in the shadows, and as such, like, you're not allowed to work together as a guild. You all have to write down your answers and then reveal them at the same time. And if any one of you have it wrong, like, it counts as all of you wrong. If you're in groups, this is another thing I did. I don't remember which guy he's attributed to, but I have some where it's like, if your group gets it wrong, then the 3 others suffer the consequences.
Ooh.
Which makes it like extra painful, right? Like, that's 3 times more painful for the house.
Yeah. So how do you do the student's health? Do you do it as one like bar for the whole house? Do you have like health per guild? Like, what's your,
so
how do you,
the last 2 years, every student had their own like health, and I actually literally printed off these hearts and laminated them, and like, if you got hit, you would hand me back a heart if you were out of hearts. I liked that system a lot, but I decided to sort of scale that back this year because of COVID. Like, I don't know, there's just so many things to think about for kids already. I decided, like, how can I make my game a little more streamlined? But I like that in a boss battle where you have the tension of like, I don't want to lose. So what I did this year is build it into the battle. Like, instead of like you personally fighting the battle, what I did for my first boss battle, and I will do throughout the rest of the year, on the battle slide, it says, here's our boss, we're fighting, the Sumerians or whatever, here's their power-ups and all this other stuff. And then it says, like, we're allied with the Babylonians. And the Babylonians' health is like, just like the boss, you just give them like a number, like they have 25 health. And so, yeah, that way you're just really dealing with 2 numbers, like our allies number and then the main boss.
Yeah. So when I had last year when I was doing it, I did like a number for each guild, and it was kind of like it was your battle points sort of idea. I think when I was doing it though, I had some cards that were specifically defense cards, so those would give some sort of defense points. So the number was different for each guild, but the way that I kind of did it, just to kind of keep everyone in it, is like, well, if one guild loses though, we all lose. And so there's kind of like this, like, the guild, again, with the most at the end, kind of it gets a bonus. So you want to have the highest health still, but you're still in it with all of your allies because, we win and lose all together. And so there was a couple times where, a kid had to play a card to save another guild or whatever. And that was pretty cool. That was pretty fun.
See, and that's where you start to get a lot of these interlocking mechanics, right? So I know we began this episode with, the base level, like if you've never started before, these are some of the things that you could get more advanced level to, where you could start to have items and power-ups for your own students that could save a guild from like damage, that could block a boss's sort of retaliation or, those kind of things.
Yeah, and even then too, if you don't have items in your game, you could always make it a mechanic in the battle itself where it's like, okay, well, does anybody want to give up some of their health to save them? And just like, there's just so much flexibility, like you're saying, with gamification, that like there's so many different ways you can spin it, and it works, and it's cool.
I do. I love it. I mean, I really do a whole lot. My students have been loving it. They liked that first boss battle. They've asked when the next one's coming, and if you end up doing items and power-ups and this kind of thing, I find the boss battles are a great way to sort of get kids into the game in general. Like, since our last boss battle, kids were like, well, I want to go into the next boss battle with more items. Well, the way to get items in my game is to do side quests and some of the other activities. So now, like, in this unit, I have had a higher participation in all of those things in preparation for the boss battle.
It's awesome.
I agree, it's awesome. And like I said, they're doing it all with smiles on their face.
For a quiz.
It's for a quiz, right? It's there's some magic happening here.
It is. It's awesome.
There's some magic happening. If you had to give, we're almost at reflection time here, so I have to ask, if you were to give some advice to that like person that's on the fence here, they've made it this far into the episode, they're like, man, this sounds great, but I just don't know how to begin. Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I would say, well, one, if you're ever stuck on something, reaching out on Twitter, using hashtag XPLAP, like, people have tons of ideas, probably more than any one of us could ever use. So that's a great resource. But I would just say, just try, just go for it. And if it, and start simple. Like I was saying, I went with Pear Deck to start with, just because like that was a comfort place for me, right? Like I felt like I could rely and lean on that structure, and then I had a clear structure in the class period, and then like I didn't have to worry about things as much because it's kind of all set for me. But maybe like Michael was saying, maybe it's easier for you to do the questions kind of on the fly and just have a picture of a boss, and then you haven't really risked too much in terms of your time and in terms of your preparation and all that.
That is definitely what I would suggest. If you know your content, just like come up with like a cool picture for the boss. If you want to use my allied structure versus these guys, then it's super easy. There's just two numbers, the good guys, the bad guys. Give the bad guy some sort of thing where, like, what was my last one? I had, for my last boss, he had 2 powers. If he rolled a 6, it counted as a 12. So that really like hit us hard. And if he rolled a 1, he'd get to re-roll to try to get a 6. But if he got anything other than a 6, it would still just count as the 1. And like those were fun little tension elements.
I like the idea of having special powers for the bosses.
If you're watching this podcast, you see his face. He's like, I want to. This is what I want to work on now.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so it is the reflection time here, and we have a fun quote here from a Zelda game, nonetheless, right? A sword wields no strength unless the hand that holds it has courage. How can we work this Zelda quote into our lives as teachers who are going to run boss battles?
There you go. I think, well, it's funny you say as teachers who are going to run boss battles, because that is immediately where my brain went to, right? Because we were just talking a second ago about just go for it, right? And Michael, you talk about all the time about how we kind of are constantly asking our students to risk and to try something new and to do something different, and then we as teachers are often afraid to do that. And I think a little courage can go a long way in the classroom. So I think that fits really well.
I really like your answer. So I'm going to take it in a completely different direction and break the rules. It's not going to be necessarily about boss battles. It's just going to be about all gamification in general. So much of it, including a boss battle, it comes down to you being kind of excited, you being like pretty fired up about this experience, you saying it's a big deal. And so I kind of like this quote that a sword wields no strength. Like gamification wields no strength if you just sort of plop it in there. Just like any, pedagogy, right? If you just sort of lay it coldly on the table and say, now do this, it's not going to have any impact. But that sword in the quote, right? The sword wields no strength unless the one that holds it has courage. If you have the courage to sort of put in your heart and soul on this, come up with a pretty neat idea, take that moment to like make the boss slide, make it look pretty cool. I tell you, no matter how cheesy, like I said, I just ask questions off the top of my head. I mean, like, there isn't fun buzzers, there isn't, the cool like digital things of like a Pear Deck or anything like that. Like, I ask them questions. I guess I have a like nice little slide behind me, but all I do is ask them questions. But it's that courage. It's that courage to put it out there. It's, you put on a little tense music, and all of a sudden, like, oof, it becomes something.
I like that, and it's courage to play, right? It's courage to be a little silly, to engage things in a little bit different way, and just not be afraid to play a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on once again. I really appreciate it. You're definitely going to be back, right? Right.
Absolutely.
Boom. All right. Everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you guys have a really, really good week. As always, if you could check out some of the other things we have going on mrmatera.com, that'll have links to my YouTube channel, this podcast. If somehow awkwardly you're hearing this podcast without knowing how you heard this podcast, that's the place you can check it out. Everybody, I hope you have a good week, and play on.